In the early morning of June 22nd, 1941, a calm sunlight touched the vast forests and open plains of the Soviet Union. For the people living there, it was just another summer day. Children played in villages, farmers tended fields, soldiers drilled at bases, preparing for the routines of peacetime, or so they thought. But on that day the world would change in ways almost unimaginable. Hitler's war machine, perfected through conquest and terror across Europe, was about to strike the largest nation on the continent. It was the moment the world would come to know as Operation Barbarossa. Hitler had long held a vision of conquest that went far beyond the nations he had already absorbed. Poland had fallen, France had crumbled. Scandinavia was under his control. The United Kingdom had survived. But Germany's ambitions were not satisfied with the West. His eyes were fixed eastward on the Soviet Union. Hitler despised it not only for ideology, he saw communism as the enemy of Germany, but also for its size, its resources, and the vast lands he believed were rightfully German. He envisioned Lebensraum, living space for his people, and he would take it by force. Planning for Barbarossa had begun months in advance. Millions of soldiers, tanks, artillery, and aircraft were assembled along a border that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Supplies were stockpiled, strategies rehearsed, maps drawn. Hitler and his generals believed the campaign would be swift, a lightning strike designed to crush the Soviet Union before winter. They assumed the Red Army would falter, that Stalin's purges had left it weak, and that the Soviet people would collapse under the pressure of the German advance. On that morning, those assumptions would be tested, and violently, catastrophically. The attack began along a front that spanned from the frozen Baltic in the north to the Black Sea in the south. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, struck first. Thousands of aircraft roared into the sky, targeting Soviet airfields, infrastructure, and communication lines. Air bases were destroyed, planes burned on the ground, and chaos erupted across the western Soviet territories. Civilians looked up in terror as the sky filled with engines, bombs, and fire. Entire towns were reduced to rubble in hours. The blitz of the Luftwaffe was precise, efficient, and terrifying. Then the ground forces moved. Panzers, mechanized infantry, artillery columns, millions of men in a meticulously coordinated attack swept across forests, rivers, and roads. Soldiers advanced with machine guns blazing, tanks rolling, and horses still pulling wagons for supplies, moving as one massive, unstoppable wave. The speed and coordination were unprecedented. For those on the receiving end, it was chaos, like the earth itself had risen against them. Soviet soldiers, many poorly trained or equipped due to Stalin's earlier purges, tried to resist. Brave officers led counterattacks. Infantry dug trenches. But the German advance was relentless. For the Soviet people, the invasion brought a shock almost beyond comprehension. Villages were overrun, cities were shelled. Refugees fled westward, carrying whatever they could, searching for safety that often did not exist. Families were torn apart. People were caught between a hammer and an anvil. The German advance from the west, the brutality of the retreating Soviet forces, and the vast impersonal machinery of war grinding everything in its path. In the first days, the Germans achieved astonishing victories. Soviet forces were encircled and destroyed in massive pockets, tanks and artillery captured or annihilated. The speed of the Blitzkrieg seemed unstoppable. Hitler's generals believed the Red Army could be crushed before winter. Moscow, Leningrad, and Kiev, iconic cities with histories stretching centuries, were suddenly within reach of falling under the German eagle. Hitler's ambition knew no restraint. He imagined a winter in which the Soviets would bend, a population conquered, a land seized. But the Soviet Union was vast, nearly incomprehensible in its size. Its terrain stretched for thousands of kilometers. Its people, despite being shocked and terrified, were resilient. And in the shadows of Stalin's paranoia, something crucial had survived. Hidden reserves of soldiers, weapons and resources lay farther east, untouched by the first strike. Factories were dismantled and moved hundreds of miles into the interior. Cities began fortifying. Even as the German advance cut deeper, the Soviet response slowly began to take shape. Winter, the greatest enemy of all, was coming. Hitler's generals, used to the swift victories in Western Europe, underestimated the Russian cold, the mud of autumn, and the tenacity of men who fought to defend their homeland. Tanks froze. Soldiers suffered frostbite. Supply lines stretched beyond endurance. The seemingly unstoppable Blitzkrieg slowed, and what had been a lightning strike became a grinding, attritional nightmare. And yet, the first weeks of Barbarossa were still a testament to the terrifying effectiveness of the German war machine. Cities fell, entire armies were captured, millions were on the move, fleeing, fighting, hiding, and dying. The world watched in disbelief. Hitler had brought Europe to its knees once again, but this time the scale was staggering. He faced a land and a people so vast that conquest could not be achieved with speed alone. It was during this campaign that the human cost of war became almost unimaginable. Civilians were caught in a conflict that they did not start. Armies were slaughtered in forests, villages, and fields, and atrocities multiplied with horrifying rapidity. As German soldiers pushed forward, orders from the highest levels encouraged brutality. Entire populations were treated as enemies. Villages were destroyed, prisoners executed. And yet, for all the devastation, the Soviet spirit endured. As the weeks turned into months, resistance grew. Soldiers, militia, and partisans harassed German supply lines, ambushed convoys, and carried out acts of sabotage. Civilians resisted in small ways, by hiding, by warning approaching units, by surviving against all odds. And behind the front lines, Stalin began consolidating power, ordering counter-offensives and slowly mobilizing reserves that would eventually stem the tide. Operation Barbarossa is remembered not for a single moment of glory, but for the overwhelming scale of human struggle, courage, and suffering. Millions of men, women, and children were caught in a conflict that was massive, beyond comprehension. Entire cities were turned into fortresses, entire forests became battlefields, and the lives of ordinary people became part of the vast machinery of war. The German army, for all its initial success, began to realize the reality of the vastness of the Soviet Union. The campaign they had imagined as a lightning strike was turning into an impossible marathon. By December of 1941, after months of relentless fighting, Operation Barbarossa had stalled on the outskirts of Moscow. The Soviets, exhausted but unbroken, launched a counter-offensive. Snow, mud, and exhaustion became allies to the defenders. The German army, once unstoppable, suffered one of the first real defeats of the war. Hitler's dream of a swift conquest of the Soviet Union, of a lightning strike that would secure Europe's east, was shattered in the cold of a Russian winter. Barbarossa taught the world and Hitler that the Soviet Union was not a simple target. It was an ocean of forests, rivers, cities, and people that could not be easily conquered. It was a nation of resilience, resourcefulness, and determination. And it was a place where the human spirit, even under the weight of unimaginable terror, refused to yield. The invasion marked a turning point in the war. It brought the Soviet Union fully into the conflict. It opened a front so vast and so brutal that the scale of human suffering and sacrifice would dwarf almost every other campaign in history. It exposed the hubris of the German command, and it set the stage for battles of staggering intensity, Stalingrad, Kursk, Leningrad, fights that would decide the fate of the continent. Operation Barbarossa was more than a military campaign. It was a cataclysm of human ambition, cruelty, endurance, and courage. Millions of lives were forever altered, lost, or destroyed. Families were torn apart, cities were levelled, armies were shattered and rebuilt. And through it all the world watched horrified as the largest land invasion in human history unfolded in real time. When we look back, the scale of Operation Barbarossa is almost incomprehensible. Millions of men marched, flew, fought, froze, starved, and died across a continent that stretched beyond imagination. It was a collision of ideologies, a clash of empires, a test of human endurance on a scale that remains unmatched. And for all the initial success, it failed to achieve the ultimate goal, the destruction of the Soviet Union. Because the heart of a nation, no matter how battered or shocked, cannot be conquered by force alone. And in that heart, the story of resistance, survival, and eventual victory had already begun.